I'm going to talk about number lines, inequalities, and rounding with respect to decimals. First, let's talk about number lines. Give me a minute to draw a number line. The same way that one can associate integers and fractions with points on number lines, one can associate decimals with points on number lines. After all, decimals can be converted to equivalent fractions. Here's an example. The decimal 1.3 is associated with a point between the points with respect to 1 and 2, and the point that's associated with 1.3 is a little bit closer to the point associated with 1. So it's approximately where that blue dot is. Okay? Now, you can also associate negative decimals with points on a number line. So, for example, minus 2.9 would be associated with a point between the points with respect to minus 3 and minus 2, and it would be a point a little bit closer to the minus 3, so approximately where that second blue dot is. All right? Now, we can talk about inequalities with respect to decimals. One way to understand inequalities with respect to decimals is by corresponding positions on number lines. To say that a certain decimal is greater than another decimal implies that the corresponding point is farther to the right on a number line. To say that a decimal is less than another decimal corresponds to saying that the associated point is farther to the left on a number line. So, for example, one could say that 1.4 is greater than 0.7, or minus 2.5 is less than minus 1.2. All right? Now, if you want to compare decimals that have different numbers of digits, you may need to add some zeros. Okay? So, for example, if you wanted to know whether 1.1 or 1.099 was bigger, in other words, was farther to the corresponding point was farther to the right on the number line, it might be easier to answer that question if you add, let's say, 2 zeros to the first decimal. So now it's compare 1.100 to 1.099. And that might make it easier to see that in this example, the 1.100 is the greatest decimal. So that's greater than 1.099. Okay? Now, can you see which one is greater between 2.029 and 2.03? You might want to try that one right now in the next few seconds. Okay? So one way to see which one's bigger, perhaps it'll make it easier for you if you add a 0 next to the 3. So now you're comparing 2.029 and 2.030. And between those two decimals, the 2.029 is less than 2.030. Okay? Now let's talk about rounding. So rounding with respect to decimals, if you're rounding to the nearest integer, it means you select the integer associated with the point closest to the point associated with the decimal. For example, the point associated with 11.2 is closer to the point associated with 11 than 12. Therefore, 11.2 rounds to 12. The point associated with 13.8 is closer to the point associated with 14 than 13. So we say that the nearest integer is 14. So 13.8 rounds to 14. Now, you can also round to, for example, the nearest tenth or the nearest hundredth. And here's an example of that. So 5.61, you can round that to 5.6. The point associated with 5.6 is closer than the point associated with 5.7. Okay? Now, there might be some confusion about what to do if a point associated with a decimal is just as far from 2 points associated with integers. Okay, if you're trying to round to the nearest integer. So, for example, does 3.5, does that round to 3 or 4? So it really, you can really assign either convention, or you can do it either way. All right, it really depends on what your group, the context that you're working with, whatever is the rule for that situation. One common convention is to round up. So to say that 3.5 rounds to 4, but not everybody follows that convention. All right? Now, let's close with some examples. So, put the correct inequality symbol between the following decimals. Also, round the following blue numbers to the nearest integer. Okay, so pause the video and work those examples out, please. Okay, so I'll go ahead and work them out. So 2.5 is less than 3.7, minus 7.1 is less than minus 6.9, and adding 3 zeros may make it easier to see that 1.02 is greater than 1.01999. All right. The 13.9 rounds to 14, and 114.2, that rounds to 114. Minus 7.9, the point associated with minus 7.9 is closer to the point associated with minus 8, and so that rounds to minus 8.